What happens when a daytime television interview spirals completely out of control, leaving one of the most talked about women in the world storming off, set in fury. The tension between Kelly Clarkson and Meghan Markle reached a breaking point that nobody saw coming, and the explosive exchange that followed will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. This isn't just another chat show moment. This is the conversation that shattered all pretense and revealed the raw truth beneath the carefully crafted public personas. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really happened here. The Kelly Clarkson show had been running smoothly that afternoon, with Kelly's signature warmth filling the studio as she prepared for what was supposed to be a routine interview. Meghan Markle walked onto the set with her usual poise, settling into the guest chair with a practiced smile. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Kelly launched into her opening remarks. "I'm so excited to have you here today," Kelly began, her voice carrying that genuine enthusiasm that made her such a beloved host. "There's so much I want to talk to you about, especially your recent projects and your journey since stepping back from royal duties." Meghan nodded graciously, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Thank you for having me, Kelly. I'm really looking forward to our conversation." The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. Kelly asked about Meghan's charitable work, her podcast, and her life in California. Meghan responded with carefully measured answers, each one delivered with the media training that had become second nature to her, but something was brewing beneath the surface, a tension that would soon explode into view. "I think what people really want to know," Kelly said, leaning forward slightly, "is how you've managed to maintain such grace under the incredible scrutiny you've faced. I mean, the level of media attention you've received is unlike anything most people could imagine." Meghan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, Kelly, I think it's important to remember that with great privilege comes great responsibility. I've always tried to use my platform to shine light on important issues, even when that's been difficult." Kelly nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the diplomatic response. "But surely there have been moments where you've felt frustrated by how you've been portrayed. I mean, as someone who's been in the public eye for years, I know how tough it can be when people misrepresent who you are." "I think," Meghan said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, "that we all have to make choices about how we respond to negativity. I've chosen to focus on the positive impact I can make rather than dwelling on criticism." The audience shifted slightly, sensing a subtle change in the atmosphere. Kelly's media instincts were clearly picking up on something too, because her next question carried a different weight. "That's admirable, and I respect that approach. But I have to ask, because I think a lot of people are curious about this, don't you think there's value in addressing misconceptions directly sometimes? I mean, when stories are circulating that you feel are unfair or untrue, isn't there a responsibility to set the record straight?" Meghan's posture stiffened slightly. "I think, Kelly, that there's a difference between setting the record straight and engaging with every piece of tabloid gossip that gets published. I've learned that some battles simply aren't worth fighting." "But what about the battles that are worth fighting?" Kelly pressed, her voice still friendly but more pointed now. "I'm thinking specifically about your relationship with your father, which has been such a source of public speculation. Don't you think your audience deserves to hear your side of that story?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Meghan's carefully composed expression flickered. "Kelly, I think that's a very personal family matter, and I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum to discuss it." "But you've discussed it before," Kelly said, her tone still conversational but with an undertone of challenge. "I mean, you've talked about family dynamics in other interviews. I'm just wondering if there's more context you'd like to provide, especially given how much speculation there's been." Meghan's eyes flashed, and for the first time, her media training seemed to falter. "I think there's a difference between sharing my truth and being interrogated about private family matters on daytime television." The word "interrogated" hit the studio like a lightning bolt. Kelly's eyebrows rose slightly, and the audience grew noticeably quieter. The friendly atmosphere that had characterized the beginning of the interview was rapidly dissolving. "I'm sorry," Kelly said, her voice carrying a note of genuine confusion. "I didn't mean for this to feel like an interrogation. I thought these were fair questions about things you've discussed publicly before." "Fair questions," Meghan repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Kelly, I came here to talk about my work, my charitable initiatives, and my future projects. I didn't come here to be grilled about my personal relationships or to justify my choices to your audience." Kelly's expression hardened slightly. "Meghan, with all due respect, when you've built your public profile partly on sharing personal stories, I think it's reasonable for people to have questions about those stories. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to understand your perspective." "My perspective?" Meghan's voice was becoming more strained. "My perspective is that I've been incredibly open about my experiences, probably more open than I should have been. And what I've learned is that no matter how much truth you share, there are always going to be people who want more, who want to pick apart every detail of your life." The studio was now completely silent except for the sound of the two women's voices. Kelly's team behind the cameras were exchanging worried glances, clearly sensing that this interview was veering into dangerous territory. "But isn't that part of being a public figure?" Kelly asked, her voice still controlled, but with an edge of frustration creeping in. "I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've learned that transparency is usually the best policy. People can tell when you're being genuine versus when you're just giving them talking points." Meghan's face flushed slightly. "Are you suggesting that I'm not being genuine, Kelly?" "I'm suggesting, Kelly," replied her media training, kicking in as she tried to navigate the increasingly tense situation, "that your audience might appreciate more candor about some of these issues. I think people relate to authenticity, and sometimes that means admitting when things are complicated or difficult." Authenticity. Meghan's voice was now openly sharp. "Kelly, I have been nothing but authentic about my experiences. I have shared my struggles with mental health. I've talked about feeling isolated and unsupported. I've been open about the challenges of navigating a new culture and new expectations. What more do you want from me?" Kelly paused, clearly recognizing that the interview had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated. "I want you to be comfortable, Meghan. That's always my goal with guests. But I also think our audience deserves honest conversations, and sometimes that means asking difficult questions." "Difficult questions," Meghan repeated, her voice dripping. "With disdain? Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you're trying to create drama for your show, rather than having a meaningful conversation." The accusation hit Kelly like a physical blow. Her face reddened, and for a moment, her famous composure cracked. "Meghan, that's not fair, and you know it. I've built my career on treating guests with respect and dignity. I'm not some tabloid journalist looking for a gotcha moment." "Then why does it feel like one?" Meghan shot back, her voice now fully raised. "Why do I feel like I'm being put on trial here, instead of being treated like a human being who's trying to make a positive difference in the world?" The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, and both women were now visibly angry. Kelly's hands were clenched in her lap, and Meghan's carefully composed facade had completely crumbled. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly becoming one of the most explosive daytime television moments in recent memory. Kelly took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Meghan, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a step back and know." "Kelly," Meghan interrupted, her voice cutting through the studio like a knife, "I think we should address what's really happening here. You invited me on your show under the pretense of a friendly conversation, and instead, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to corner me about my personal life. That's not journalism, that's exploitation." The word exploitation seemed to ignite something in Kelly that had been building throughout the exchange. Her eyes flashed with anger, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a steel that few had ever heard from the usually bubbly host. "Exploitation?" Kelly's voice cut through the studio with a sharpness that made even the camera operators flinch. "Meghan, I have interviewed thousands of people on this show, from A-list celebrities to everyday heroes, and I have never, not once, been accused of exploitation. I ask real questions because real people deserve real answers, not carefully crafted public relations responses." Meghan's eyes widened at the sudden shift in Kelly's tone. The warm maternal figure that audiences knew and loved had been replaced by someone fierce and uncompromising. "Kelly, I didn't mean to know." "You did mean to," Kelly interrupted, her voice gaining momentum. "You came on my show knowing exactly what kind of host I am, knowing that I don't do puff pieces or softball interviews. You knew I would ask substantive questions, and instead of engaging honestly, you're trying to paint me as some kind of predatory journalist. That's not just unfair, it's insulting." The studio fell into an even deeper silence. Meghan's mouth opened and closed, clearly struggling to find words. The careful media training that had served her so well in countless interviews seemed to have completely abandoned her in the face of Kelly's unexpected fury. "I think," Meghan finally said, her voice shaking slightly, "that there's a difference between asking substantive questions and ambushing someone on live television. I came here to discuss my work, my charitable initiatives, the positive impact I'm trying to make in the world. Instead, you've turned this into an inquisition about my personal relationships." Kelly leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "An inquisition? Meghan, I asked you about your father. That's not an inquisition. That's a question about a relationship you've discussed publicly multiple times. If you didn't want to talk about it, you could have simply said so instead of accusing me of exploiting you." "But that's just it," Meghan replied, her voice rising again. "I shouldn't have to deflect your questions or dance around topics that are painful for me. A good interviewer would recognize when a guest is uncomfortable and pivot to something else. A good interviewer," Kelly shot back, "asks the questions that matter, not just the ones that make their guests feel comfortable. This isn't therapy, Meghan. It's journalism. And if you can't handle being asked about things you've put into the public domain, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally, something that looked like cold fury. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Kelly, I think you're forgetting something very important here. I don't need to do interviews. I don't need your show, or any show for that matter. I'm here as a courtesy, trying to use my platform to highlight causes that matter to me. But I don't have to sit here and be lectured about journalism by someone who built her career on singing pop songs." The insult landed like a physical blow. Kelly's face went completely white, then flushed deep red. The audience gasped audibly, clearly recognizing that Meghan had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, singing pop songs. Kelly's voice was barely controlled now. "Meghan, I may have started as a singer, but I've been doing this job for years now. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, survivors of unimaginable tragedies. I've built a career on treating people with dignity and respect while still asking the questions that need to be asked. And you're sitting here, someone who married into fame, lecturing me about journalism." "Married into fame." Meghan's voice cracked like a whip. "Kelly, I was an actress for years before I met my husband. I had my own career, my own success. I didn't need to marry anyone to become relevant." "No," Kelly said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You just needed to marry someone to become internationally famous. And then you spent the next several years complaining about the attention that fame brought you. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't court the spotlight when it serves your purposes and then cry victim when it doesn't." The accusation hit Meghan like a lightning bolt. Her carefully composed facade completely crumbled, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying enormous weight. "How dare you suggest that I courted any of this?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Kelly replied, her voice still hard, but with a slight tremor that suggested she was beginning to realize how far this had gone. "I'm stating a fact. You've made your personal life a central part of your public narrative. You've written about it, talked about it, built your brand around it, and now you're sitting here acting like asking you about it is some kind of violation." Meghan stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent studio. "I think," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion, "that this interview is over." Kelly looked up at her, clearly torn between backing down and pushing forward. "Meghan, sit down. We can work this out." "We're both just no," Meghan said firmly, her voice cutting through Kelly's attempt at reconciliation. "We can't work this out because this isn't about a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. This is about respect, and you've made it clear that you don't have any for me." "That's not true," Kelly said, standing up as well. "Meghan, I do respect you. I respect your work, your advocacy, your strength. That's why I'm treating you like I would any other guest, asking real questions about real issues. I'm not giving you softball questions because I respect you too much to insult your intelligence that way. You call this respect? Meghan's voice was incredulous. Kelly, you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to corner me, trying to force me to discuss private family matters on live television. You've accused me of courting fame, of not being authentic, of building my career on my marriage. If that's your idea of respect, then I'd hate to see what disrespect looks like. Kelly's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Meghan, I never said you weren't authentic. I said that authenticity sometimes means admitting when things are complicated. There's a difference. Is there? Meghan asked, her voice carrying a bitter edge. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're saying I'm a liar. I'm not calling you a liar, Kelly said, her voice showing the first signs of uncertainty. I'm saying that sometimes people present a version of events that serves their narrative, and that's human nature. We all do it. So you are calling me a liar, Meghan said, her voice rising again. You're just doing it in a more polite way. Kelly ran her hands through her hair, clearly frustrated. Meghan, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that truth is complicated, and sometimes the stories we tell about our lives are more complicated than they appear on the surface. My truth isn't complicated, Kelly, Meghan said, her voice cold and clear. My truth is that I was treated badly by an institution that should have protected me. My truth is that I was isolated and unsupported when I needed help the most. My truth is that I made the difficult decision to leave a life that was making me miserable so that I could protect my family and my mental health. There's nothing complicated about that. But what about the other side of the story? Kelly asked, her journalistic instincts clearly warring with her desire to de-escalate the situation. What about the perspective of the people who say things happen differently? Meghan's eyes flashed with an anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The other side of the story? Kelly, the other side of the story is an institution that has spent centuries protecting itself at the expense of the people who serve it. The other side of the story is a family that chose their reputation over their own son's happiness. The other side of the story is a media machine that profits from tearing down women who dare to speak their truth. But surely, Kelly said, her voice taking on a pleading quality, you can understand why people might have questions about some of the things you've said. I mean, when you make serious allegations about racism and lack of support, people want to understand the full context. The full context. Meghan's voice was now shaking with rage. Kelly, I lived that context. I was there for every conversation, every slight, every moment of isolation. I don't need to provide more context to satisfy people who have already decided they don't believe me. The two women stood facing each other across the small space of the interview set, the distance between them seeming to grow with each exchange. The audience sat in stunned silence, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in daytime television. Meghan, Kelly said, her voice softer now, but still carrying an edge of steel, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to understand you, and I think our audience deserves to understand you too. Understand me. Meghan's laugh was bitter and hollow. Kelly, you don't want to understand me. You want to dissect me. You want to find the cracks in my story so you can create a moment for your show. Well, congratulations. You've got your moment. With that, Meghan turned toward the edge of the set, her movement sharp and decisive. The cameras followed her, capturing every detail of her exit as the studio erupted into chaos. Wait, Kelly called out, her voice carrying across the studio as Meghan reached the edge of the set. Meghan, wait, don't do this. Meghan paused, her hand on the studio barrier, her back still to Kelly and the cameras. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she slowly turned around, her face a mask of controlled fury. Don't do what, Kelly? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Don't walk away from someone who's treating me with such obvious disrespect. Don't refuse to participate in whatever circus you're trying to create here. Kelly took a step toward her, her hands raised in a gesture that seemed both pleading and defensive. Don't throw away this opportunity to have a real conversation. Meghan, we're both smart women. We both care about important issues. We can find common ground here. Common ground. Meghan's voice carried a note of disbelief. Kelly, you just accused me of courting fame and building my career on my marriage. You suggested that I'm not being truthful about my own experiences. You've spent the last half hour trying to tear apart everything I've said. Where exactly is the common ground in that? The audience was completely silent now, some of them leaning forward in their seats, others looking uncomfortable as they witnessed this unprecedented breakdown of civility. Kelly's production team behind the cameras were making frantic gestures, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. The common ground, Kelly said, her voice steadier now, is that we're both women who've had to fight for our place in this industry. We've both faced criticism and scrutiny. We've both had our motives questioned and our integrity challenged. I thought that shared experience might help us have a more honest conversation. Meghan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been recognition crossing her features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cold anger that had been building throughout the interview. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made Kelly visibly tense. "We are both women who've had to fight for our place. But there's a crucial difference between us, Kelly. When you faced criticism, you had the support of an entire industry behind you. When I faced criticism, I had to face it alone." "That's not true," Kelly protested, her voice rising. "Meghan, you've had incredible support from fans, from advocacy groups, from people all over the world who believe in your message. You're not alone in this fight. Support from strangers on the internet isn't the same as support from the people who are supposed to care about you," Meghan shot back. "It's not the same as having an institution that's supposed to protect you actually do it. It's not the same as having a family that stands by you when things get difficult." Kelly's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, something like genuine sympathy crossed her face. "You're right," she said quietly. "That kind of support is different, and I'm sorry that you didn't have it when you needed it most." The unexpected moment of empathy seemed to catch Meghan off guard. Her rigid posture relaxed slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice was less sharp, though still guarded. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means something." Kelly nodded, taking another small step forward. "But, Meghan, that's exactly why I think this conversation matters. Your story, your real story, not the sanitized version or the tabloid version, but the real, complicated, messy human story. That's what people need to hear. That's what helps other people who are going through similar struggles. My real story." Meghan's voice carried a note of exhaustion now, as if the anger was finally giving way to something deeper. "Kelly, I've been telling my real story for years. I've been as honest as I can be about my experiences, about the challenges I faced, about the decisions I made. But every time I share something personal, it gets twisted, analyzed, picked apart until it doesn't even resemble the truth anymore. But that's exactly why you need to keep telling it," Kelly said, her voice gaining strength. "Because the alternative is letting other people control your narrative. And you're too important, your voice is too valuable to let that happen." Meghan stared at her for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting emotions. "You say, my voice is valuable," she said finally, "but then you spend 30 minutes trying to undermine everything I say. You can't have it both ways, Kelly." "I wasn't trying to undermine you," Kelly replied, her voice carrying a note of frustration. That suggested this was a genuine point of disagreement, rather than a media strategy. "I was trying to understand the complexities of your situation. I was trying to ask the questions that I thought would give you the opportunity to provide more context, more nuance." "More context for what?" Meghan asked, her voice sharp again. "More context for why I chose to prioritize my mental health over royal duties. More context for why I couldn't stay in a situation that was making me miserable. More context for why I wanted to protect my children from the same treatment I received." "More context for how we move forward," Kelly said, her voice taking on an urgency that seemed to surprise both women. "Meghan, your story isn't just about what happened to you. It's about what happens next. It's about how we create change, how we build better systems, how we support people who are going through similar struggles. And you think that requires me to relitigate every detail of my personal trauma on daytime television?" Meghan's voice was incredulous. "You think that's what moving forward looks like?" "I think," Kelly said, her voice slower now, more thoughtful, "that moving forward requires honesty about where we've been. And I think sometimes that honesty is uncomfortable, even painful. But it's necessary if we want to create real change." Meghan was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through a range of emotions. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired but still carrying an undercurrent of anger. "Kelly, I have been honest about where I've been. I've been more honest than I probably should have been. I've shared intimate details about my mental health struggles, about feeling suicidal, about being isolated and unsupported. I've opened up about racism, about feeling unwelcome, about making impossible choices. What more do you want from me? I want you to trust that your audience is smart enough to handle complexity, Kelly said, her voice gentle but firm. I want you to trust that you don't have to have all the answers, that you don't have to be perfect, that you can be human and still be an advocate for change. But I am being human, Meghan said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm being as human as I know how to be, and what I get in return is people questioning my motives, my integrity, my version of events. I get people like you asking me to justify my choices, to explain my pain, to provide more evidence for experiences that nearly destroyed me. The raw emotion in her voice seemed to hit Kelly like a physical blow. Her face crumpled slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice was much softer. Meghan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you had to justify your pain. That was never my intention. But it was the effect, Meghan said, her voice hollow. Regardless of your intention, that's what happened here today. I came on your show hoping to talk about positive change, about the work I'm doing to make the world a better place. Instead, I ended up having to defend my own experiences, my own truth, my own right to make choices about my own life. Kelly stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. The studio remained silent, the audience holding its collective breath as they waited to see how this would resolve. You're right, Kelly said finally, her voice barely above. A whisper, you're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I let my desire to have a substantive conversation override my responsibility to treat you with the respect you deserve. Meghan looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Kelly, I appreciate the apology, but I don't think it changes anything. The damage is done. This interview, this conversation, it's going to be dissected and analyzed and used against me in ways that I can't even imagine right now. It doesn't have to be, Kelly said, taking another step forward. We can edit this. We can start over. We can no, Meghan said firmly, cutting her off. We can't start over. This is what happened. This is the reality of what occurs when I try to engage with media, even media that I thought would be different. This is exactly why I'm so careful about what I share and how I share it. Kelly's face showed a mixture of regret and frustration. Meghan, please don't let this one conversation make you retreat even further. Your voice matters too much. My voice matters, Meghan repeated, her tone carrying a bitter edge. But apparently it only matters when it's saying what other people want to hear. With that, she turned again toward the edge of the set, her movement decisive and final. This time, Kelly didn't try to stop her. The cameras captured every step as Meghan walked away, her posture straight and proud despite the obvious emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Kelly stood alone in the middle of the set, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The audience sat in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to react to what they had just witnessed. The bright studio lights seemed harsh and unforgiving as they illuminated the wreckage of what had started as a routine. Celebrity interview. What? Did you think of this incredible confrontation? Subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.